The air in the mezzanine was thick with the scent of old money, cheap ambition, and the faint metallic tang of the harbor fog trying desperately to penetrate the triple-pane windows. It was a gala, or what passed for one in this echelon of the command structure, polished marble floors reflecting the inadequate flicker of crystal chandeliers, the muted thrum of a string quartet struggling against the rising tide of drunken laughter. Every man wore a suit tailored to hide his gut and emphasize his perceived importance. Every woman wore a nervous smile and jewelry that could finance a small military coup. And then there was Silva. She stood near the edge, a deliberate shadow against the stark white column, wearing a dress that was not chosen for comfort or conformity, but for purpose. It was obsidian black, tailored with unforgiving precision, rising just high enough at the throat to hint at restriction, but plunging low across the back, exposing the pale, almost luminous skin of her shoulders and the sharp, clean line of her spine. She hated the exposure. Every fiber of her operational instinct screamed against the vulnerability, yet the protocols of this specific assignment, the requirement to be seen but not noticed, to be present but absent, demanded the uniform. She was a silent observer in a room full of noise, a calculator amidst emotional variables. Her operational cadence, usually a rigid 4-beat rhythm, was slowing, forcing itself to match the lethargic pulse of the high society charade. He arrived as they always do, loud, entitled, and utterly oblivious to the physics of the room. Major Kyle, a silver spoon molded into a parade ground caricature. He commanded a desk, not a battlefield, yet he wore the stripes of kinetic achievement like a skin suit, tight and ill-fitting. His laughter arrived seconds before he did, a grating, brittle sound that shattered the delicate balance of the string quartet. He spotted Silva instantly, not because she drew attention, but because her stillness was an accusation in a room dedicated to restless movement. He saw the cold geometry of her gaze, that flat, oceanic blue that never reflected light, only absorbed it, and mistook it for timidity. He approached her quadrant of the room, trailed by a constellation of sycophants, junior officers eager for proximity to influence, and women who laughed too hard at every unfunny remark. "Well, well," Kyle boomed, his voice pitched just high enough to demand that the entire eastern wing of the ballroom cease conversation and listen to his genius. "Look who crawled out of the paperwork pile. Sartu Silva, isn't it? Our little Technica." The word Technica hung in the air, heavy with mocking italics. It was a rank, yes, denoting her specialized training in intelligence acquisition and operational logistics, but in Kale's mouth it was reduced to glorified filing clerk. Silva did not shift her weight. She did not blink. Her cold stare locked onto a point 3 inches above Kale's right shoulder, analyzing the tensile strength of the wall behind him. Her internal monologue, the incessant stream of threat assessment, remained detached. Threat level, 0. Noise level, excessive. Engagement. Protocol, passive containment. "You know, Sergeant," Kale continued, leaning in just enough for the stench of expensive cologne and cheap whiskey to reach her. "We were just discussing the recent field assignments. Exciting stuff. Explosions, geopolitical risks, the whole shebang. And here you are stuck tracking inventory of, what was it, replacement batteries for the comms unit." One of his lieutenants snickered, a sharp, almost frantic sound, calculated to win favor. Kale savored the reaction, taking a long, theatrical sip of his champagne, droplets clinging precariously to his immaculate mustache. "It must be heartbreaking," Kyle sighed, placing a heavy, condescending hand on the marble column beside her head, trapping her subtly. "All that potential, all that rigorous training reduced to inventory. It's like owning a Ferrari and only ever driving it in the parking garage. Some people, I suppose, are just meant for the shadows. The safe jobs, the ones where you don't actually get blood on the uniform." The phrase, blood on the uniform, was the insult's apex. It suggested she lacked the courage, the grit, the necessary savagery to operate where the rules dissolved. It was the oldest dismissal in the military playbook. You are clean. Therefore, you are useless. You are soft. Silva's jaw moved, a micro-movement, observable only if you were looking for the precise moment a switch flips from off to standby. It was the smallest kinetic shift, the beginning of the operational transition. Her pupils, already unnervingly large in the low light, contracted infinitesimally. She finally lowered her gaze from the wall, focusing on Kale's eyes, shallow, brown, and currently glistening with self-satisfaction. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence she imposed was sharper than any retort. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air from his performative ego. Kyle hated the silence. Arrogance demands applause, not stillness. "What's wrong, Sergeant? Lost your voice? They call you the library ghost in operations, but I prefer something more fitting for that startled, wide-eyed look. The crying girl, perhaps? Afraid you'll break a nail if you touch a real weapon." He laughed again, louder this time. The sycophants dutifully followed suit. The string quartet missed a beat. This was the atmospheric pressure test. For many, this level of sustained public degradation would induce either immediate retreat or a flood of frantic defensive words. But Silva was forged in a different kind of heat. She was trained to utilize stillness as a weapon of misdirection. When the enemy expects movement, they are vulnerable to absolute lack of movement. Her hand, resting lightly at her side, shifted, not dramatically, but with purpose. Her thumb ran across the slick surface of her phone, which was not a phone, but a hardened encryption device. The single action was a silent transmission, requesting new parameter validation. Priority Omega. The narration dwells here, focusing intensely on the minute detail of her composure, the way the light caught the fine, almost invisible down on her exposed forearm. The rhythm of her breath, so slow, so regulated, that it belied the intense computational churn happening beneath the surface. She was running contingency scenarios, not about how to survive Cale's ridicule, but how to ensure Cale never occupied a position of authority over anyone again. "You know, Silva." Cale leaned closer still, dropping his voice conspiratorially, thinking he was sharing a moment of intimacy with his subordinate, when in reality he was just entering the kill zone. "This dress, very daring, very exposed, seems risky for someone who prefers to hide." He gestured broadly toward her back, and the movement was clumsy, fueled by liquid courage. His glass, still half full of expensive golden liquid, tipped violently. Silva reacted not with panic, but with the cold, measured efficiency of someone solving a simple mathematical equation. She shifted her core weight slightly, pivoting her body just enough to save the dress from the splash. But the sudden, jerky movement caused the thin fabric of the exposed back panel to catch momentarily on a subtle protrusion of the marble column. The fabric stretched, taut and revealing, highlighting the precise landscape of her skin. And that's when it happened. The snickers died in the throats of the junior officers. Cale's smirk froze mid-contempt. On her left shoulder blade, stark against the pale skin, was a mark. It wasn't a tattoo in the conventional sense. It wasn't the neat, stylized graphic art favored by soldiers trying to prove masculinity. This mark was brutal, asymmetrical, and deeply disturbing. It was an old burn, textured like dry riverbed clay, puckered and angry, spreading outward from a central point near the scapula, then fading into delicate, lace-like scarring toward the edge of her trapezius. It was dark, almost black in places, edged with a pale, almost white ring of dead tissue. "What in God's name is that?" Cale muttered, the whiskey courage evaporating, replaced by a sudden visceral revulsion. He had expected maybe a clumsy butterfly or a sloppy anchor. Not this. A woman nearby, dripping in diamonds, and the judgmental certainty of the very rich, leaned in, her voice pitched high enough for moral outrage. "Oh, my dear, what a terrible, terrible mistake. Did you let some cheap parlor artist practice on you? It looks like road rash, or some hideous botched tribal piece. Truly ghastly with that dress." The laughter returned, tentative at first, then blossoming into full-throated cruel derision. The idea that this cold, precise woman had a piece of hideous, unprofessional scarring was too delicious for the judgmental assembly to resist. They laughed at the bad tattoo, the ugly mark, the poor judgment of the quiet clerk who dared to wear an expensive dress. Kyle regained his footing, seizing the opportunity to regain control of the room's energy. "Yes, Sergeant. What is that? A poorly applied Black Widow motif? Trying to look tough? Because frankly, it just looks like you fell down a flight of stairs and didn't bother to get the wound properly cleaned." The scorn peaked. Silva stood there, receiving the wave of mockery, utterly still. The humiliation was total, physical, public. Then, a voice cut through the noise, sharp and low, carrying the undeniable weight of earned authority. It was General Thorne, an older man, 75 if he was a day, the director of intelligence analysis for the Western Bloc. a man who rarely spoke unless the fate of nations hung on his words. He was standing several yards away, near the elaborate ice sculpture, nursing a single malt scotch. He had been watching Silva from the moment she entered, recognizing the specific, unsettling gravity she carried. Thorn hadn't moved a muscle, but his voice was a whip crack. Silence. The word was simple, but its effect was instantaneous and absolute. The laughter strangled itself. Cale flinched, snapping his attention to the general, recognizing the irreparable damage mocking Thorn's authority would entail. Thorn didn't look at Cale. His eyes were fixed on the scarring on Silva's back, his expression morphing from detached observation to profound cold horror. He took one slow, deliberate step toward her. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, the music fading into an irrelevant hum. "Major Cale," Thorn's voice was now a deadly whisper that somehow commanded total attention. "You called that a Black Widow motif. You said she fell down the stairs." Cale, sensing the ground collapsing beneath him, stammered, "Sir, It looks amateurish, sir. I simply meant to imply." "You implied ignorance, Major." Thorn cut him off, his gaze still fixed on Silva's mark, an ignorance that borders on professional negligence. Thorn stopped directly behind Silva, close enough that she could feel the residual heat radiating from his immaculate dress uniform. He didn't touch her, but he hovered over the mark like a museum curator examining a priceless, gruesome artifact. "That, Major," Thorn stated, the word hanging like judgment, "is not a Black Widow tattoo, and she did not fall down the stairs." He paused, letting the silence expand, dense and suffocating, ensuring every soul in that room understood the gravity of the impending revelation. "That mark," Thorn continued, his voice now imbued with the grim historical finality of a war correspondent dictating a report of mass execution, "is what the surviving intelligence community refers to as the Red Skull Burn." Cale blinked. The rich woman who had mocked the road rash put a trembling hand over her mouth. "The Red Skull Burn," Thorn articulated slowly, ensuring the sound of the words drilled into their privileged minds. "It is not applied in a tattoo parlor. It is applied in what the enemy calls the black site cages in the deep South Caucasus. It is the signature of specific interrogation specialists, the ones who don't care about extracting information. They care about extracting compliance. They use localized electrical induction coils, heated to approximately 1/800 degrees, applied directly to the shoulder blade, often repeatedly, until the skin is chemically and structurally destroyed. It is meant to be permanent. It is meant to be excruciating. He gestured slightly towards the texture of the scar. "Notice the specific radial pattern, Major. It mimics the infrared signature of the induction coil itself. They called it stamping the cattle. It takes between 36 and 52 hours of continuous exposure to the coil and sensory deprivation to create that depth of scarring without causing systemic organ failure." Thorn leaned in closer to the mark, his tone dropping even further, now intimate with the horror. "They apply it to the shoulder blade because it is a secondary nerve cluster, deep enough to induce blinding pain without causing immediate, incapacitating paralysis. They want the subject conscious. They want them screaming. They want them to know, physically, scientifically, that they are being remade into an instrument of pain." He straightened, his old eyes, sharp as ice picks, finally meeting Cale's frantic, whitening face. "The purpose of the Red Skull Burn is never survival. It is an execution marker. It is applied when the interrogators are certain the subject has been broken and is about to be disposed of. It is their final, triumphant flourish." Thorn let that sink in. Execution marker. "But here is the critical detail, Major Cale, the detail that makes this mark legendary and terrifying," Thorn whispered. "You see, they only apply the Red Skull Burn to prisoners who have resisted total compliance for a certain, extremely extended period. It is the mark of a victim who has survived the absolute limit of the enemy's psychological and physical torture protocol without yielding information. It is, paradoxically, the signature of failure for the captors, because once the mark is applied and the body is processed for disposal, they usually realize, too late, that the subject, this person, with this terrifying burn, never broke." He looked at Silva, whose cold stare remained unwavering. "If you have this mark," Thorn concluded, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, "it means you were tortured to the edge of death, you were branded for execution, and yet you not only refused to yield the operational data, but you survived the attempt on your life, escaped the black site, and found your way back home. It means you saw the absolute darkest heart of war, and you returned with it, still beating in your chest. Cale's face was now a sickly shade of gray. His glass trembled so violently he had to clutch it with both hands to prevent the champagne from spilling again. He wasn't just silent, he was structurally compromised. He hadn't mocked a clerk, he had mocked a ghost of tactical survival, a survivor of an operational scenario so classified, so brutally kinetic, that most in the room believed it existed only in classified intelligence briefings. The silence that followed was immense. It was not the casual silence of a pause in conversation. It was the silence of absolute fundamental recognition. The rich woman swallowed visibly, clutching her diamonds as if they might shield her from the implied violence of the room. The sycophants instantly dissolved backward, melting into the crowd, desperately wanting distance from Kyle and the terrifying proximity of Sergeant Silva. Silva, Zinc Silva, the Technica, the woman who tracks the battery inventory, the one Cale had derided as the crying girl, finally moved. It was a slow, deliberate turn, designed not to startle, but to command. She turned her body fully, facing Cale, concealing the terrible mark, but revealing the full, cold intensity of her gaze. Cale flinched, physically recoiling a half step. Thorne, the general, nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, to Silva, a gesture of profound, silent respect between professionals who understood the cost of operational secrecy. Silva spoke for the first time since Cale approached. Her voice was low, perfectly controlled, devoid of inflection, the sound of grinding steel. "Major Cale," she stated, her words measured and clean, striking him like perfectly aimed projectiles. "I have just received parameter validation. It appears the operational cadence of your immediate future has been altered." Kyle looked confused, desperate. What are you talking about, Sergeant?" She paused, allowing her cold stare to sweep across the room, ensuring that every privileged witness understood the imminent fall of this arrogant man. "The inventory I track, Major," she continued, her voice never rising above a confident whisper, "includes high-value assets and strategic human resources. Your immediate superior, General Thorne, initiated a classified review of your recent operational directives approximately 7 minutes ago. The review concluded 5 seconds after the red skull burn was observed by General Thorne." She didn't look at Thorne. She didn't need to. The general had served as her silent witness, validating the gravity of her existence, providing the final necessary weight to her accusation. "Your previous remarks regarding my lack of field experience, my softness, and my operational utility have been logged and appended to the final summary report. The summary report, Major, concludes that you represent a clear and present threat of gross command incompetence and a significant failure to understand operational risk profiles." Cale gasped, the color draining entirely from his face. "This is absurd. You can't. I'm a major. You're a sergeant. You're manipulating the system." Silva's lips curled, the barest hint of a movement that was far more chilling than a sneer. It was the predatory movement of a cold-blooded animal confirming its strike. "I am a sergeant major." "Correct. I was also designated Black Widow 7 Delta during my tenure in unauthorized deep penetration missions," she clarified, using a designation so sensitive that the mere mention of it in a social setting was terrifyingly taboo. "My rank reflects my preference for operational anonymity, not my kinetic potential." She placed the hardened encryption device on a nearby silver platter, the dull metallic thunk sounding deafeningly loud in the paralyzed ballroom. "I am relieved of duty tonight, effective immediately. You, Major Cale, are now relieved of all command, pending a full, non-negotiable court-martial initiated by the office of General Thorne." Cale stumbled backward, his carefully constructed persona shattering like brittle ice. No, this isn't real. You are the crying girl. You are just a clerk." Silva lowered her head slightly, meeting his terrified gaze with the full, unblinking intensity of her cold stare. "The crying girl." She acknowledged the insult one final time, her voice dripping with finality. "The one who survived the red skull burn. The one who watched the man who gave me that mark bleed out slowly on a gravel floor in Azerbaijan. The one who now ensures that men like you never send another soldier to die through sheer blind incompetence." She didn't wait for him to respond. She didn't wait for the ensuing chaos or the frantic attempts by the general's aides to control the scene. Her function was complete. The target was neutralized. The power shift was absolute. Silva turned, moving with the same precise, measured economy with which she first entered the room. Her body language was an echo of the professional executioner departing the scene. Mission accomplished. no fanfare required. As she moved past the general, Thorne lifted his glass in the slightest, most respectful of salutes. Silva acknowledged him with an almost imperceptible nod, the silent covenant between those who know the price of silence and the necessity of violence. She walked toward the exit, the black dress flowing behind her like a necessary shroud, the horrible, beautiful mark of survival now hidden from view, but vividly burned into the memory of every person in that room. The sound of Major Cale finally dropping his glass, shattering crystal against marble, was the last sound she heard before the heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, plunging the noise back into a manageable hum. The ballroom, moments ago a monument to arrogance and superficiality, was now a mortuary of Cale's career, steeped in the profound, paralyzing silence of a terrible truth recognized too late. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.